Welcome everyone to CivilNet. Today we're joined by Tigran Grigoryan, head of the Regional Center for Democracy and Security, a Yerevan-based think tank. Tigran, thank you very much for taking the time.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Let's just start with the latest updates from Nagorno-Karabakh. The latest we've heard from the Armenian government is about 13,000 arrivals so far. I know that you have a lot of connections in Stepanakert. What are you hearing? What's the latest you've heard?
Well, we are witnessing a mass exodus from the territory. Thousands of people are still stuck in this traffic jam that starts in Stepanakert and ends at the border with Armenia. So this is basically the situation. I think both the government in Armenia and in Nagorno-Karabakh have failed to organize this process properly. That's why we are witnessing so many difficulties. And of course, this is the root cause of this process, of course, Azerbaijani policies of ethnic cleansing on the ground. People realize that it's not safe to stay there, that nobody is going to take the risk to actually live there with their children. And we have been warning about this situation for months. We have been telling all the international mediators, diplomats, that there are actually two realistic scenarios. In Nagorno-Karabakh, the one that includes actual hard security guarantees on the ground, international involvement, de facto self-governance, and the other one is this depopulation, ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. And unfortunately, this worst case scenario is now underway.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up international actors and their response or non-response. We'll get there. But before I do, I just wanted to stay on the point you made about the preparedness of the authorities in both Yerevan and in Stepanakert. To your point, the Nagorno-Karabakh government today urged people temporarily not to travel from Stepanakert to Nagorno-Karabakh, citing the need to first evacuate wounded people. However, as far as we've seen, the mass exodus is continuing. On the Armenian side, in Goris, they have set up humanitarian centers and are providing first aid and medical care. What has your reaction to the response been?
Yeah, I mean, this message is too late. I mean, people have started exiting the territory. It's too late. This should have been done like days earlier. The authorities there should have given assurances to the population that everybody who wants to leave the territory will have the opportunity to leave if they had such kind of agreement with Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, well, this is natural as well. We're witnessing state collapse there, and of course, these people are not robots. They have their own families. They have their own needs. We need to remember that there's still a huge humanitarian crisis going on in Nagorno-Karabakh in terms of lack of basic supplies and stuff like that. So people are actually trying to both survive and to actually fulfill their obligations. That's why we have this situation. In the case of Armenia, there are some basic preparations, but I don't think this is enough. We will have tens of thousands of refugees coming to the country, and I don't think that Armenia alone will be able to address this humanitarian catastrophe. That's why there is a significant need for international support. All the international aid agencies or all the UN agencies should be already engaged in the process. At this point, we haven't seen any kind of active engagement on the part of the UN, for example, and that is kind of strange. All the international partners who have been facilitating this process and promising that an era of peace will come to the region should at least help to solve the humanitarian needs of these people and help to integrate these people who have suffered so much throughout the years, create opportunities for them, provide proper accommodation, provide job opportunities. So, yeah.
Let's move on to what you were saying about the months warning international actors involved. I don't necessarily even need to kind of lay out how it's been. We all know what the warnings have been, how many warnings have been given, how frequently. And despite that, Azerbaijan launched strikes across Nagorno-Karabakh last week. What do you have to say?
Yeah, first of all, it should be mentioned that the lion's share of responsibility for this process, apart from Azerbaijan, who is obviously the perpetrator, But apart from Azerbaijan, the lion's share of responsibility for this process is on the Armenian government. When they started their misguided policy of lowering the bar on the issue of status, it was clear from the onset that this will be the outcome. The depopulation of Nagorno-Karabakh will be the outcome. I was, to be honest, amazed that actors like the US, who have institutional memory, who have been engaged in these talks for 30 years, have been talking about rights and security guarantees within Azerbaijan without understanding that it's not doable. We're talking about one of the most violent ethno-political conflicts in the world, and all the previous cases throughout the history of this conflict, all the patterns show that it is impossible to have safe coexistence without actual hard security guarantees. And nobody was discussing these hard security guarantees. Nobody was even investing enough political capital to internationalize this process. Azerbaijan obviously wanted to make this a domestic process, and it eventually succeeded, but none of them did enough to actually prevent this scenario. And the same is true for the European Union. They started this process, they actually facilitated this process, and in the process they actually empowered the Aliyev regime. The fact that both the US and the EU have been fetishizing this peace deal for I don't know how much time helped Aliyev. For example, when we had all these discussions in the UN Security Council and the US was pressing all the other members not to adopt a resolution, that was because they fetishized the peace deal, thinking that by signing this peace deal we will have some sort of comprehensive, sustainable peace in the region. We now see that we won't have any kind of comprehensive peace in the region, even if the peace treaty is signed. You can't talk about comprehensive peace while having tens of thousands of refugees flooding the country without proper accommodation, without proper job opportunities. This is not the peace you were talking about or you were promising the Armenian leadership, who was naive enough and criminal enough to follow these misguided policies that ended up like this.
Well, I appreciate that you use the word naive, because that's another thing I wanted to ask about. So let's just talk about the US for a second, although of course with the EU we can say many similar things. We can talk about, for example, the statement by Yuri Kim, the acting Assistant Secretary of State, who just earlier this month said that the United States will not tolerate any attacks on the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. About 5 days later, less than a week later, Azerbaijan struck. And so far, we have seen nothing from the United States. Do you think that that was a naivety or a kind of willful ignorance? As you said, they have this institutional memory of 30 years. What do you make of it?
Well, the US policy has been changing in the last half a year. We've been hearing from different private closed-door meetings that the US is considering the sanctions option against Azerbaijan if Baku crosses certain red lines in Nagorno-Karabakh. And this red line was supposed to be the escalation of the situation on the ground or some sort of ethnic cleansing. So what Yuri Kim said several days ago was basically all the things that were repeated during these closed-door meetings. Also, I think Secretary Blinken had a phone call with Aliyev at the beginning of September, during which he conveyed this message that there is this possibility of sanctions against Azerbaijan. However, as I've already said, the US has put too much importance on this peace treaty agenda. This has prevented the US to take more active measures, to have a tougher stance on Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan has been using this approach. Aliyev probably understood that if he does something, there won't be any consequences. There wouldn't be any consequences, and this is very similar what was with the policy vis-a-vis Russia, starting from the Crimea crisis. Like, the West was playing with Putin, the West was flirting with Putin, building all these gas pipelines, until the big war started. We had the similar situation here, and now I think this is an absolute failure and debacle of the US foreign policy and the EU foreign policy in the South Caucasus.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up Russia as well, because that is the big bear in the room, so to say. Over the weekend, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan gave an address to the nation, televised address, in which he appeared to attempt to shift blame to Russia. He said, among other things, that the attacks last week on Karabakh raised serious questions about the Russian peacekeepers' goals and motives, and that it has become clear to all of us that the instruments of the Armenian-Russian strategic partnership are not enough. In response, we got a statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry in response to Pashinyan. Among other things, they say the Armenian leadership is making a huge mistake by deliberately attempting to sever the multifaceted and centuries-long ties between Russia and Armenia. As someone who has watched this for some time, I can't recall that sort of aggressive and blunt statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry toward Armenia. What do you make of this?
I think first of all, let's discuss Russia's role in the latest escalation, in the latest war. I think it's absolutely clear for everyone that this operation was green-lighted by Moscow. The official reaction, the inaction of the peacekeepers on the ground, the following statements, and this process started probably 4 or 5 months ago. If we remember the meeting of foreign ministers in Moscow, after which Lavrov issued a statement basically repeating all the Azerbaijani talking points, it was like absolutely clear back then that Russia has now adopted all the Azerbaijani positions on the conflict and is trying to actually get dividends at the expense of Armenia and at the expense of Nagorno-Karabakh. So this was absolutely clear, and we should be absolutely clear about Russia's role. Russia basically colluded with Azerbaijan, and Russia is probably one of the beneficiaries of this escalation. And it's not an incident that people like Hikmet Hajiev have started talking about the importance of the Russian peacekeeping mission. Hajiev even said that it is possible to prolong the deployment of the presence of the Russian peacekeeping mission. Before that, they were talking about the peacekeeping mission being temporary. Now the rhetoric has changed. Coming back to your question, we're witnessing now a long-term crisis in relationship that started actually last September when Armenia got attacked by Azerbaijan and Russia wasn't able to fulfill its obligations. Russia wasn't able to even issue a single straightforward statement. Back then, Russia was unable to even promote its own peace plan, the so-called Khovayev plan. Azerbaijan rejected it, and not being able to actually impose this plan on Azerbaijan or persuade Azerbaijan to accept this plan, Russia has decided to put the blame on the Armenian government. Armenian government has its own shortcomings. I didn't approve the signing of the Prague Declaration back then, but I also don't think that this Prague Declaration could have changed something fundamentally. It couldn't change the post-2020 war status quo because, you know, it was just a statement. It wasn't even a signed document. And Russia has used this statement as an excuse for its inaction. And starting from last year, they have been like basically putting the blame on the Armenian government, colluding with Azerbaijan, and promoting their own agenda. Now we see the deepening of the crisis. In the last address by the Prime Minister, there were even some hints that Armenia might leave the CSTO, but everybody should still understand that the structural dependency of Armenia on Russia is huge. Energetic dependency, energy dependency, economic dependency in all other areas. And we still have, like, I think some people in the Armenian government showed that by getting rid of Nagorno-Karabakh, they will be able to actually secure the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Armenia. But we now see that Turkey and Azerbaijan are actively discussing the so-called Zangezur corridor issue, and Russia is a primary beneficiary in this process. If this corridor, so-called corridor, opens, then there will be Russian presence on it. So, in a sense, Russia will still have a lot of leverage both on Armenia and on Azerbaijan, and it's quite naive that the Armenian government is thinking or has been thinking that by getting rid of the Karabakh problem, by distancing itself from the Karabakh problem, it will manage to actually safeguard the territorial integrity and security of Armenia.
Well, Tigran, thank you again very much. It's a lot to think about. And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.